Hi, I'm Nichole Vogelsinger of Wild Boho, and today we are going to be stitching with rhinestones. These are the crystalline sew-on rhinestones. They are so beautiful, so sparkly, creating bejeweled botanicals. Look at all that glitter and sparkle and shine. I can't wait to get started on this project with you. So you are going to need a hoop and some fabric for your project. Now this project does not have a pattern with it, which means you get to determine the hoop size and the type of fabric that you want to use. You see I have an oval hoop here. I have a round hoop. Both of these are different sizes. The project that I'm working on today is in a square hoop. So you really have any option, a hoop that you like to work with. And then fabric. I had 3 different fabrics that I was going between for my project. I end up using this one, but a solid fabric works great. These are both solids, but you can see there's also some markings in them. That is perfectly fine. You just don't want a fabric that's super, super busy for this project. This is like a linen blend. So any sort of solid type fabric for this project. Let's talk about the threads that I'm going to use. So I am using Appleton's Crewel wool. This is a thinner than a tapestry wool type of thread. I want a thread that has a little bit of texture to it. Again, this is something if you have 3 different colors that you like, that you want to use. I am using 3 colors for the stitches, but that doesn't have to be how yours is. I'll show you when we get to that part, the variety that you have to choose from for your stitches and your thread colors. But these are my 3 threads. And then I'm also using just a 12 weight cotton. This is by Wonderfil Specialty Threads. I'm going to use this for all of the beads that I'm adding to my project and the sequins. I'm also going to be using 3 different colors of the DMC. This is the Cotton Redders Mat. You can find this either on DMC's website or they carry it at a lot of Michael's now. I'm using a sequins and beads kit, mostly for the sequins on this one. I'm also going to be using 6 tubes, and again, we're going to get to all of this when we hit the beading section of the project, but I'm using, each of these is a shiny and a matte, so 3 colors, 6 different tubes of the check seed beads. These are size 8. I'm going to be using the Preciosa check crystal beads. These are all 4mm, but you could also use a 6mm bead. Again, completely up to you. When you look at this project and decide what supplies you want to get, yours might vary just a little bit. I'm going to be using the check bugle beads as well. And then I'm also using the crystalline sew-on rhinestones. I have 3 different sizes here. And when we get to that part of the project, you're also going to see how I mix and match the colors. I recommend watching the video first and then deciding what supplies you want to get before running out and getting everything and then deciding you wanted to change your mind a little bit. I have a variety of needles here. You can see my very jumbled needle holder. I like to have a few different sizes. We're going to talk about that when we get to adding the beads, but you are going to want to make sure that you have a needle that's small enough to pass through a lot of the beads, and then a needle with a larger eye to work with some of the thicker threads. You're also going to need a ruler and something to mark your fabric with. I'm just using, this is a Mark Be Gone pen. It's water soluble, so just something to mark lines on your fabric. And finally, scissors and white school glue. So gather all of your supplies and we can get started on this project. Let's get our fabric ready in the hoop. So I am using a gray background. This is an Andover Fabrics by Juicy Juice. I really like these solids because they kind of have a little bit of something going on. You can see there's black speckles in the back. So it's like a solid, but it's not boring. My other option that I had been considering, this is more of like a chambray linen piece, which I also really like the texture of, but I didn't have this fabric in this color. And so we're going with this fabric. All you'll need is a fat quarter. You can see that I'm using one of the square hoops. So it's not a huge palette that we're going to be working with. So you're going to want to separate your hoops and place the back hoop behind the fabric and the front hoop on top of the fabric. You can iron this if you want. If you've watched my videos, you know that I like to use as little equipment as possible. And I also know that pulling the fabric tight is going to make this fabric tighter and all the little wrinkles are going to disappear. So that's what I'm going to do. These square hoops are a little trickier to adjust in the back. So once you get it on the fabric, you're going to leave about that much around right now. And I like to just start tightening my hoop. I tighten it and then pull the fabric tighter and then just keep doing that until my wrinkles are mostly gone. Now we need to prepare our fabric for the stitching. So you are going to want a ruler and something to write with. It does not need to be something permanent. This just needs to mark your fabric so that we get like a guideline for the next stitches that we are going to do. And so I'm just doing mine crossways right now. And so I just want like a line here. I'm probably going to keep the ruler here and do one more line on this side. This is just to help me keep my stitches all going in the right direction. When you're working with long strands of thread, it can be tricky sometimes to just keep them all like going in the right direction. And so this will help. So just something like this. And while we're at it, we're going to do a few lines in the other direction too, the same exact way. And now we have a nice grid pattern that is just going to make our embroidery so much easier. It's time to embroider. So we are using 2 different colors of the Appleton's wool. I think they look really nice together. And I also love using this wool because it has a little bit of wispiness to it. It's also not going to overpower the rest of our embroidery. So this is the base of our embroidery. So we want something that can then be embroidered over, which is the plan. So choose one of your colors. If you're just using one color, totally fine. Or you can see how you like one color and start adding another and see how you do with that too. This is a thread eating stitch, especially when covering an area like this. One skein of thread should be fine though. And so I am starting with a little bit more than, well, a lot more than I normally use. I just tie a knot in the end and I'm going to thread my needle. You don't need to use a specific needle for this type of embroidery. We're just laying down some base stitches. So I'm just using a milliner's needle. Choose one that you like to work with. And I am going to start with this middle line. So I'm going to bring my needle up, coming to the very edge of the fabric. If you struggle getting your needle into the fabric at this point, you can see that I'm kind of putting my needle under the hoop to get to the far edge like this. So you just kind of lift the fabric away from the edge of the hoop and put your needle through. We are going to be making a series of long straight stitches for this first part. And so we have this nice grid to work with, and I'm just going to bring, you can see I'm like laying my thread out along that line, and then I'm going to take it down through the fabric at the end of that line. With so much thread, you might end up getting knots, so just try and work slowly through that. Okay, so pull it nice and tight. There's our first stitch. Now our next stitch, I know it seems like it would be easy to bring it up from here, and it would seem like we are going to use less thread, but we really want the tension of this thread, and so the best way to do it is to go back to the start and bring it down exactly the same way again. So you can determine how big you want this grid to be. I want my stitches to cover the fabric, but I also want to see a lot of the fabric through the thread, which is why I'm using contrasting colors. So I'm not going to be putting my lines of stitching super close together. So you can see there's still, I'm going to be able to see my fabric through the stitches, which is what I want. So just determine how wide you want your stitches to be and make your next stitch. So you can see there's a long length of thread on the back, my thread up here. I keep adjusting my fabric, and I'm coming back up at the top. And my next stitch, I'm just eyeballing it, but I'm going to try and keep the same width of stitches as I work my way up. And then I'm going to come back and work my way down this way. Exactly the same thing we're doing now. So just take your time and work through these stitches. Here is what it will look like when you finish doing the lines in one direction. And now I am switching colors, and I'm going to do the same exact thing using my grid marks here to do the other direction. Now, if you are using a square hoop like this, you may notice that I have a few little like edges that kind of look a little loose. Those I will fix at the very end. If they're even noticeable anymore once we get everything on here. So sometimes these hoops are a little bit looser when you're trying to get your fabrics to stay in there. And so it's just something you work with while you're stitching. And then at the end, when you're gluing your fabric back to the hoop, you can fix that then. So I'm going to stitch the marks in this direction now. Here's what my background looks like. And when you look closely at it, you can see that none of these strings or threads are attached to the background. So that's what we're going to do next. Now, this stitch is a great stitch for filling a large area. It's great for a background like this. You can fill in shapes, everything. The only thing is it is a little bit time consuming. That's okay. This is slow stitching. So I'm going to grab I'm using a third color of the Appletons. This is a gray just to match my background color. And so I am just going to pick an area and start stitching. I just want to make sure. You can see that these lines can still be adjusted at this point. And the blue lines from my background are still there. They're going to start to go away. We're also going to be covering them up, so I'm not concerned about them right now. And at the very, very end, you can take like a little Q-tip with some water and the lines will go away. So just pick an area. I'm just going to start right at this corner. And I am bringing my needle up where the lines cross. And then I'm just going to cross over that to create a little stitch. Now here's where you can have a little variety in your stitches, and everybody can choose to do something different. I could leave it like that, or I could come back again on the other side and I could create a little X. So like a little cross stitch. Because I left a large area, like my grid is very large, I'm going to do little X's to cover all of these intersections. So that's what I mean when I say that this stitch does take a little bit longer, just because there are 3 different steps to this process. But the end result is going to look really cool. So sit back, relax, put on a show that you enjoy watching or a podcast, and just create your stitches. These are going to anchor all of the threads to the fabric, and then we'll be able to layer on top of that. Well, here it is. This is my finished tacked down trellis stitch, which I think is super, super pretty. If you get to this point, I'm very proud of you because this took a very long time to do. I'm doing a larger hoop. So if you're working on a smaller hoop, it's going to take you less time, obviously, but it does take time. You're going and you're crossing over every single intersection of your threads. So just be patient with yourself. The result is definitely worth it. I think it looks so pretty. I used a contrasting thread. So I used the 2 colors to make my lines, and then the contrasting thread to do the little cross stitch tack in between each intersection. So another idea, if you wanted to try, like you could do multiple colors going down, try and keep it the same way this way, and then you could always do the outer edges and go on into the middle with a variety of colors that way. It's just a fun stitch to play around with. So once you get to this point, we are ready to now add our rhinestone flowers. So I have 3 different sizes of the crystalline. These are the sew on rhinestones, and I actually have them in my little dishes here. So what's great about these is that they are easy to sew on to your project. You can see the little holes right here. So it's just going to be 2 stitches to pass through. I have different colors that I'm going to be using. So the next step is to kind of visualize how you want your rhinestone flower garden to look. I am going to have my flowers all start about here. I want some of this top area to be open for other stitching, other beadwork. And I'm going to be making room for the stems down here. We're going to be doing a variety of stitches for the stems. So your first step is just to kind of visualize how you want your flowers laid out. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm just laying them on the fabric. Now, once I get to the point where I'm happy with how all of my flowers look, I'm then going to take a picture of it and use my picture as reference, because you can only sew on one at a time. If you're trying to sew on one, these are all going to be falling just like that. So the picture will help you to put them back where you want them once you're happy with the arrangement. But I do like to lay things out first to get an idea of how many I want. I have different colors, so I'm going to be adding those in. And it just gives you an idea of what you're going to be working with. So that is the next step. Figure out your arrangement of the rhinestones. So this is how I'm going to arrange mine. And now I'm going to take them all off. I've taken a picture of it already, so I know that I'll be able to get it back to about how I had it. And if as I'm working on it, I decide I like it to look a little different, you can absolutely change things as you go. So I'm going to start with this one rhinestone. So as you, or before you start to stitch, you're going to want to make sure that your needle passes through both of the holes of the bead. I always check that out before I'm even starting to bead, because I don't want to spend time threading a needle if it's not going to go through. So I check that out first. I'm just using a thread. It's a 12 weight thread that kind of coordinates with my background. I know that I'm going to be adding some green threads for the stem, so this is a good color that I'm using, and I'm just going to thread my needle. I do use a knot on the end of my thread, so I've already tied that. And now I'm going to grab my bead. I'm checking out where the holes are. They're both along the side, on each side. So I'm just going to place my first bead, and I'm going to bring my needle up around where I want that bead. I'm going to pass it through the first hole into the second hole. And then before I take it down through the fabric, I just want to make sure that my bead is in the right position. And once it's there, I'm going to take it down. You can see that my needle is coming very close to the bead there. I want it to be nice and tight to that bead. Now, because it's not a heavy bead, but it is a larger bead, I'm going to go through that hole one more time. I like the security of knowing that the beads are really on the fabric. They're not going anywhere. So just take it through one more time if you're using the larger beads. And I'm kind of taking it down exactly where my other needle, or where the other needle and thread went down the first time. So there's the first pass through. And now I'm going to work on the second hole. So I'm just coming up to where the second hole is, taking my needle down, just readjusting to make sure that when I secure it now, it's really in the right spot. And again, taking my needle down really nice and close to the bead. And I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm just coming up nice and close to the bead again, passing through the hole a second time. The holes on these are not too tiny, so they're easy to find, easy to thread a needle through. They're great beads to sew on. And then there is my first flower. Isn't that pretty? I love these rhinestone beads so much. I love all things that sparkle, and I can't get enough of this. So now I'm going to do the same exact thing with my next little bead. I'm actually going to put this one right here. And I'm checking out where the holes are. I've got two along the side then. And I'm going to stitch this down exactly the same way. So I'm coming up on the side, nice and close to the bead, where I want it to be. taking it through the hole. The first time around, it moves around on you a lot, and that's fine. So you just want to make sure it's where you want it. I like to hold the thread nice and tight. Take the needle down super close to the bead. And there we go. And I'm going to do the same exact thing. Once I can also just do my second hole next. Once I pass the needle through and have it secured, I'm going to go through each of these holes one more time to do my bonus stitch to just make sure it's really on the fabric. And again, these are not heavy beads. These are not going to weigh the fabric down at all. But with a larger bead like this, I just like to have the security of knowing that if it pulls against something, or I travel with my hoops a lot of times to workshops and everything, I just like to know that they're secure and aren't going to fall off and ruin my day. So there are my first two beads. So I'm just going to go across and add the rest of my beads. As you place your beads, just mentally picture that we are going to be adding stems throughout here. So if you have beads that overlap or are very close like this, just think about how we're going to be adding that stem. We want like a nice little straight stem for some of these. So don't overlap them too much. Give yourself a little space as you sew your beads on. When you get to the point where you are running out of thread, I like to take my needle to the back, and I'm going to tie a knot. Whenever I'm using beads, I always tie a knot with my threads. And so I just take my needle under a few of the threads near where I am ending, and I just tie a little knot, sometimes 2 or 3 knots, just to make sure it's really secure on there. And then I cut the thread. I leave a little tail. Here are my hoop guts so far. I'm really loving everything that's going on back here. If you follow me at all, you know that I love the hoop guts of my work. So be proud of those hoop guts. You spent a very long time to get to this point. So I'm just going to keep going with my rhinestone flowers. Here are my rhinestones all sewed on. You can see I put 2 in a different direction just for a little variety. And no, this is not how I had planned it to be when I took my picture. As I was working on it, I kind of came up with another arrangement. So if your arrangement of rhinestones does not look like how you had pictured it at first, go with it, because you want to be happy with how it turns out. And I'm really happy with how this looks. So the next thing is we are going to add some stems to these flowers. I have 3 different colors of green thread that I'm going to be using. This is DMC. It's the Cotton Redders Mat. You can find this either on DMC's website. You can find it at Michael's. I pick it up at my local Michael's. It's nice because it is a thicker thread that's very easy to stitch with. This is not a divisible thread, which means you can cut it right from here and use it as is without having to divide it into sections like some of the other DMC floss. So I'm going with 3 different colors. I'm kind of keeping this fall color palette going. So I'm going to work on the feather stitch next. So I'm just cutting a length of thread, tying my little knot, and then I'm going to thread it through a needle. Because this is a slightly thicker thread, you just want to find a needle with an eye that is slightly larger so that it's easy to thread. And I'm going to start with this bead, and I'm going to create a stem right here. So the feather stitch, you're going to picture 3 lines. Right down, like 3 vertical lines, and I refer to one as the middle and 2 as the sides. So I'm not drawing it because it wouldn't really make sense to draw a line on this. It's more of a kind of go with the flow sort of stitch. But as I'm talking about it, just picture 3 lines. So right now I'm coming up in the middle of my stem that I'm creating. So I'm always coming up in the middle and I'm going down on one of the sides. So I'm taking my thread down. I'm working just on top of all of these other stitches. So it does help to have a thread that is differentiated from your background stitches so that it stands out a little bit more. These threads are thicker than the Appleton's wool that I was using, so I think it helps. The colors are different. It is going to stand out. So I'm coming down on the side. You can see it's not exactly even with that first stitch there. It's just a little offset, a little bit lower. And I am not taking the thread all the way through. This is where my thumb catches it. And I'm going to bring it back up in the middle to secure it now. And just gently pull your stitches. Again, because you're going through a lot of the stitches that are already there, you just want to work carefully in this section. So now I'm going down on the other side. Again, slightly offset from these stitches. As I make my way down this vine or stem that I'm creating. And again, my thumb is catching it. I'm going to bring my needle up in the middle now. You can determine the stitch length for this. You can see I'm keeping all of my stitches around the same length. And now I'm going to come back down onto the other side. Don't pull all the way through. Come up in the middle. And I'm going to keep working my way down this stem. As I stitch this one, I am always telling myself that I'm coming up in the middle and down on the sides. It just helps me to remember where I'm going. And I think I've done this enough that I now just automatically in my head am saying that to myself, like up in the middle, down on the sides. Helps you to remember where you are in your stitching. Now we are going to come back and add little beads to the end of this. You can add the beads as you're stitching it, but I'm going to add some more sparkle into this, and I know that the holes of the beads are smaller and wouldn't work with this needle or this thread. So it's kind of going to be a 2-part stitch, adding the beads on the end of this. So now I've come to the end. To end this stitch, once you get to the very last part of it, you're just taking your needle down to secure that stitch. So you can see I'm coming down on the outside of the stitch one last time, bringing it through. And then because I'm going to work somewhere else, I don't want to carry my thread. So I'm just going to wind it through a few times. I don't need to knot this. I don't have any beads on it, and it's not going anywhere. So then I can just trim it and start again. So add a few feather stitches. You can vary where they're going to be. You can have longer ones. I think I'm going to have at least 3 of them and decide how it looks then, and then I can come back and add more or move on to the next stitch that we're going to do. Here is my feather stitch, which looks really cool. I used all 3 colors, and I'm going to use all 3 colors throughout the stems in this just to keep things all looking about the same. I want color, but not like too much color. So that's what I'm thinking of as I'm choosing my palette. So now I'm going to show you a variation of a chain stitch. It works up to be a thicker stitch. This is called the Hungarian braided chain, and I work it from top to bottom. So we're just picking one of the beads and we're going to work along a length of we're forming an imaginary line again. So to make my chain, I am going to start with a small anchor stitch. So this is just a very small stitch, enough so that you're going to be able to get your needle and thread under it again. So here is what my little stitch looks like, right there. So now I'm coming up about a stitch length away, and you're deciding what that stitch length size is for you. And then I'm going to take my needle under that little anchor stitch and pull my thread through. And that is my first stitch. Now my next stitch, I'm coming up just a little bit further down. I'm not coming up a full stitch length away. I'm coming up maybe 1/4 of an inch away from that last stitch. And I'm going to pull my thread all the way through. Now I'm taking my needle under that same anchor stitch one more time. And this is a little tricky because I have other threads going on too. I want to make sure I'm only going under that anchor stitch. So then I'm pulling my thread through, but I'm not taking it all the way through yet. I'm bringing it through and leaving about that much. And then I am taking my needle down. And again, not pulling my thread completely through at this point. It almost looks like you have a little pair of butterfly wings. My thread got a little twisted. Okay, so see, here's like the body of your butterfly and your little butterfly wings. And now you're gonna come down again about that same little mini stitch length away. And I'm not pulling my thread all the way through at this point. I'm going to take my needle and I'm putting it under, I'm going under that little cross or chain stitch that we made. So it's like I know this sounds morbid, but it's like I'm pinning the butterfly wings down with that needle. That's the best way to describe it. I wouldn't do that to a butterfly, just FYI. And then I'm going to pull my thread, and you can see it tightens up there. And then I can take my needle through. Now again, I'm doing the same exact thing. I have to make my little butterfly wings, so I'm not taking it all the way down. I'm going back down into that same hole, but making my butterfly wings. And yes, your thread will get slightly twisted at this part, so just be patient with yourself. It doesn't matter too much other than I'm trying to show you what the shape of it should look like. And then I'm going down my little mini stitch length away again, bringing my needle up. Don't pull it all the way through just yet because you want to go under the stitch you just made. So every time you do this, you're not going under previous stitches up here. You're just going under the stitch you just most recently made. And each time you move down, you're going under the stitch you just made. So once my butterfly wings are pinned down, that's when I pull the thread all the way through. And you can see it tightens that up. And then you can pull your needle and make your next set of butterfly wings. And just continue this way all the way down to the bottom of the fabric and the hoop to create your stem. Deal with the little twist there. Make your next little mini stitch length away. Don't pull all the way through. Go under, take your needle over this wing, under the little stitch you just made, the chain stitch. Take it slow, especially if you're going through lots of threads, like we have our background threads and this chain stitch thread, and then pull all the way through. So this is the Hungarian braided chain stitch. You can see that it's making a really nice thick line, which is going to stand out from everything that we have going on here. We don't want dainty little stitches. We want some thicker stitches to hold up these beautiful rhinestone flowers that we're creating. So continue with that. Add a few of them throughout your rhinestones. This is what it will look like when you have finished stitching all the stems. You can see the variety of the braided chain stitch plus the feather stitch is really nice with the rhinestones. There's a lot going on down here, but now we're going to add a little bit of sparkle to the feather stitch. So we are going to use the Bead Landing, the Preciosa beads. These are all 4mm strands, and you can see I have 3 different colors of green. I've already cut off beads from each of the strands. And we are also going to need, I'm using the same exact thread, the 12 weight thread that I used to sew the rhinestones on. So we're going to thread our needle, again, making sure that the needle can pass through the beads because these are a smaller bead. And so I already checked my needle and I know that it's going to fit. Okay, so we are just going to pick one color and pick a strand of feather stitch. So I'm just going to start on the end here. Now I'm not going to add one of these beads to every little spoke of the feather stitch. I'm just going to scatter a few around, and I'm going to try to disperse the colors of the beads as well. So I'm going to use some of the darker greens over here. When I look at this project, my goal with color is not to have the eye focus on just one thing. So right now, some of the darker green I think is standing out more. So we're going to add some dark green throughout this so that when your eye looks at it, it's not going to focus just on the dark green in one particular spot, but it's going to see it throughout and it's going to flow from piece to piece, which is really the goal with any of the colors that you use on an embroidery project. You want your eye to just flow naturally over the project, not focus on any one thing. And if you're working on it and you realize that it is focusing on just one thing, maybe change it a little bit or add another piece of that color like I'm doing here throughout your piece so that it does flow a little bit more naturally. So all I'm doing is just putting a bead on the needle and then adding it where I want on the fabric. These are beautiful beads that are also going to bring some of the sparkle that's up here. They're going to bring it down a little bit lower in the project too, which again, for our eyes, we want our eyes to travel naturally through the piece and not get stuck on any one particular spot. So I'm just going to add 4 beads there. I'm going to move over. I'm just going to carry my thread from the back. I don't need to tie it off just yet because my next stitch where I'm working is pretty close. And I'm going to switch up the color of the bead that I'm using. And so I'm just going to do this throughout the rest of my feather stitch. Just add a little bit of sparkle wherever I think it needs it on the feather stitch. Well, here is our sparkle. You can see it's looking fabulous. And so the next step is we're going to add a few leaves to our braided chain stitch. So I'm going to just be using the check seed beads. These are the bugle beads. And we're just going to scatter these throughout the same way that we scattered some of the Preciosa beads around. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm just bringing my needle up. Now we're going to want these bugles to kind of look like the little leaves or the little, you know, branches of the feather stitch. So we're going to be putting them at an angle. So I'm just taking it down just like that. And we're going to just scatter them around throughout the chain stitch. If you have multiple colors of bugle beads, this would be a great time to pull those out and vary the colors of green that you're using as well, or whatever color you decided to use for your flowers and for your stems. So here's what it's going to look like. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to add these bugle beads to each of my stems. Well, if you thought we were done with beading after the stems, do you know me at all? We are not done with beading. I have one more thing to add to the flowers. So if you look at that, we have surrounded our beautiful rhinestone with some more seed beads. So now I am using, these are the Preciosa Permalux beads. You can find them at Michael's. What I love about these is each one is the same color, but one is a matte version and one is a shiny version. So I'm going to be using all of these colors in my garden here just to add a little variety so that it doesn't all look exactly the same. So I've got the same color, but I'm adding shine here and some matte here, and so on and so on. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to add a ring of beads around your rhinestone. So we are going to start with this little orange one here. I am just using this same thread. The thread is not going to be visible, so I have used the same 12 weight thread for all of the beading on this project. And I'm just going to bring my needle up right at the bottom or the top. You just bring it up at one point in your rhinestone area. And then I'm going to stack a lot of beads. If you have a bead stringer for this, one of the bead bowls, you could definitely use that. But we're going around a small circle of an area, so I don't think that I'm going to use that for this area. I'm just going to string a bunch onto my thread. And as I'm stringing, I'm just trying to get a gauge of how many beads I'm using here, because we are going to want the beads to meet up with where we started. You can just move them around a little bit to get an idea. And there we go. So now I'm taking my needle back down. I'm going to try and get it almost exactly where I came up. And I'm just going to pull it so that it snugly fits around the rhinestone. And now, just to really secure it there, if I left it alone, this would likely fall off at some point. The beads wouldn't fall, but this would come off from this area. So now I'm just going to anchor it down by making a few small stitches that just go over the thread in between the beads. So again, you can't see this at all, but it's just fastening everything securely around my little flower. And I might do like 3 or 4 stitches total. You see how you can gauge how many stitches you'll need as you're working on this. And I'm just going to do one more. So I kind of did one on each side of this oval. And there we go. You can see it just adds, I think it adds a lot to have this little circle of beads compared to just the plain rhinestone. It just brings out and enhances the color that's already in there. So I'm going to do that for each of the beads along here. Now you could choose to leave it just like this. This looks great. I'll show you how to finish it off in a few minutes. You don't need to do anything else, but if you can, and if you want to, you can do what I'm going to do. And that is, I'm going to use the sequins and beads kits. I am going to add a few sequins to this upper area. It looks great right now, like it really doesn't need anything. But if I can add a little bit of sparkle just to carry it throughout the whole piece, then I think I want to do that. And that is super easy. All I'm going to do is bring my needle and thread up in one of the little squares that we've made with our trellis stitch. Put a sequin on the needle and then add it to the square. All I need is one tiny little stitch at the top of that sequin to secure it, just like that. So I'm going to scatter a few throughout here. Again, I'm not going to load this up because there really is a lot of sparkle and a lot of great stuff going on with this hoop, but I wouldn't be me if I didn't want to add just a few more bits of sparkle throughout this hoop. Well, check out all of that sparkle. You can see I added sequins just along like the curve of the hoop, because again, as I'm working on a project like this, I'm thinking about how does it look as a whole. And I have a lot of sparkle going on here. I didn't want it exactly to meet up with it here, so I wanted to leave a space there so that you could appreciate all of it together. And that is my final hoop. So let's finish it up. This is the point in the project where you are going to want to tighten your hoop and make sure that there is no wrinkling of the fabric. Once you've done that, really tighten the hoop up. You can see on the back of my hoop, I had two areas where this hoop was leaving a gap in the fabric. Sometimes when you're working with a hoop that is a shape like this, or one of the oval hoops, as you try to tighten your fabric, there will be like little gaps in the hoop because it's an odd shape and it's hard to get those out. So what you can do is take your hoop apart, and I just wrapped a strip of fabric in the two corners where I was having trouble with the gapping of the fabric. So it was on this part, the bottom part of the hoop. I took it apart, I just wound it around and then put my fabric back in, and it solved the problem. So that's one method that you can use if you're working with a shaped hoop that isn't letting you tighten the fabric completely. So now that this is tightened, I'm going to take my scissors and I am just going to trim around the fabric. I'm leaving maybe an inch, a little less than an inch of fabric all the way around. You want to have enough fabric left that you can fold it over the back of the hoop, but that the fabric that you're folding back doesn't touch the fabric of your project. And so you can just double check a few of your areas. I've done this a lot, and so I just kind of know, I can just kind of judge about how much fabric to cut off. And then I'm going to take my white school glue and I'm going to run a strip of glue all the way around. I can go over this little fabric that I wound up around the hoop here. This is going to allow us to fold the fabric over the hoop and create a nice edge on the back that will give us a finished appearance for the hoop. And so once you have your strip of glue there, just pick an area and I just start folding the fabric over. You can use, I kind of go ahead with one thumb, and then my other thumb is kind of just pressing it a second time. And you can see it already, it stays nice and flat. This is a good time to push out any little wrinkles. But again, this is the back of your hoop, so it should look like you've been working on a project. I love the hoop guts of my project. Once this has dried completely, you can leave it like this, tie a ribbon through the hardware of your hoop and hang it on a wall. You can gift it. It's great to add to a gallery wall or a gallery shelf. I'm always switching up my shelves, and I like to mix in little pieces that I've created with other pieces that I've bought at antique stores, and I just love changing up my art throughout the year. You can put a piece of felt on the back, but I really like to leave my stitches uncovered like this, again, because you know how much time went into creating this and all of the threads that you've used, and I really have an appreciation for what the back of my work looks like. And so I like to admire the hoop guts, and I leave it just this way. Even if I'm gifting it, I will put a little tag on the back with my name on it or whatever, but then I leave it open because I just really like the look of that. Before you would hang this or put it on a shelf or anything, definitely let this glue dry for about a day. It will dry faster than that, but I like to just be really sure if I'm placing it against a wall that there's not any glue that's gonna stick to the wall and pull off wallpaper or paint. So just be careful with it, let it dry, and then you can flip it over for the full reveal. So there we have our finished project, full of sparkle, full of rhinestone gorgeousness, and beautiful stitches that might have taken forever, but were definitely worth the effort that we put into them. I hope you enjoyed this project, and as you get started on yours, happy stitching!